HMP/YOI Brinsford, which houses more than 500 young prisoners aged 18 to 29, has faced years of criticism for failing to deliver safe, purposeful and rehabilitative conditions. A new review by His Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons, published after an inspection visit, reveals a mixed and still troubling picture of a jail trying to recover from deeply rooted dysfunction but achieving only patchy progress. At the previous inspection, Brinsford was heavily criticised for a risk-averse and demoralised staff culture, high violence, poor living conditions and minimal opportunities for prisoners to learn, train or work. It was described as a place where prisoners spent too long locked in cells, where vital first-night reception procedures were failing, and where purposeful activity was almost an afterthought. 10 months later, inspectors returned to examine progress against 9 concerns, while Ofsted reviewed 4 themes related to education, skills, and work. In some areas, the review found cautious optimism. Leaders at Brinsford had taken steps to shift the negative culture among staff, which had previously led to unnecessarily restrictive practices. The number of prisoners placed on keep apart lists, for example, had been cut down because staff were increasingly using mediation and conflict resolution instead of blanket separation. A staff culture survey, completed by over 150 people, revealed a more reflective and open approach among many staff, and managers had introduced new development opportunities to build leadership skills. The inspection team noted that middle managers seemed to be more on board with the governor's vision than in the past, creating a somewhat more purposeful and supportive environment overall. Nonetheless, there were still challenges. Inspectors pointed out that many frontline officers were new and lacked confidence, partly because senior managers were not visible enough on the wings to help guide and coach them. While staff consultation had improved, there was little evidence that prisoners themselves were involved in shaping cultural reforms. Taken together, these findings led inspectors to judge that leadership had made reasonable progress since the previous inspection. The first days in custody can set the tone for a prisoner's entire sentence, and Brinsford had previously failed badly in helping men settle in. On this review, the inspection team found meaningful change. Reviews of the reception process by both a community expert and an audit team had led to practical improvements. Clutter was cleared away from the prison's entrance, rooms were repainted with input from a neurodiversity manager, and a short welcome video was commissioned to help explain procedures to new arrivals. Posters in multiple languages explained how prisoners could get help and what to expect. The holding rooms in reception were upgraded with reading material, puzzle books, televisions and information displays, although inspectors still described some toilets and flooring as dirty and worn. More peer support was now in place, including Samaritans trained listeners who were on hand to offer reassurance to anxious prisoners. Inspectors observed that prisoners were moved through reception more quickly than before, although managers still were not collecting routine data on how long this took. Bedding was reliably available in the first night centre, where cells were made up in advance, and a small first night pack was given to each new prisoner with food and drink. One lingering frustration was that prisoners still waited up to 2 weeks to place a first full shopping order, but a plan was in development to create a second night shopping opportunity using a credit advance, aiming to keep prisoners out of debt. Showers in the induction unit had been refurbished and general cleanliness was acceptable, unlike in the rest of the prison. A new packing workshop on the induction wing provided additional out-of-cell time and opportunities to earn small amounts of money. Overall, inspectors considered progress in the early days of custody to be good. Violence, a chronic problem at Brinsford, remained unacceptably high. Recorded incidents had actually increased by 22% in the 6 months prior to the review compared to the earlier inspection, although serious assaults had fallen slightly. Staff assaults were in line with other comparable prisons, but the overall rates of violence between prisoners were significantly higher than average. Some improvements were seen in violence reduction procedures, such as better quality assurance processes, but these were described as still far from robust. Investigations into incidents were often delayed or incomplete, and personal care plans remained generic. The The replacement of conflict coaches with violence reduction representatives had achieved little so far, with only 3 people trained and all on the same unit, limiting their impact. There were more encouraging developments too, such as the introduction of motivational speakers, including a mother who lost her son to knife crime and a high-profile ex-offender, which prisoners found thought-provoking. Despite some small steps, inspectors concluded that progress on reducing violence was insufficient. Use of force remained a highly problematic area for the jail. In the previous 6 months, there had been 410 recorded uses of force, roughly the same as at the full inspection, showing that overall levels were still high. Weekly scrutiny meetings had improved oversight, and there was more consistent collection of body-worn camera footage, up to 57% from around 10% previously. This was a welcome sign of more accountability. Nevertheless, many use of force reports continued to lack detail and showed no evidence of attempts at de-escalation. Inspectors were particularly concerned about the continued high use of PAVA, incapacitant spray, deployed against 31 prisoners in 14 incidents over the last half year. In several cases, it was not clear the spray had truly been a last resort, and the records appeared overly positive about staff actions, even when practices were questionable. A new effort to identify staff who repeatedly resorted to PAVA and support them through reflective practice sessions had reduced its use by some officers, but inspectors still concluded that progress was only reasonable. Living conditions at Brinsford continued to disappoint. After a scathing audit by Prison and Probation Service following the last inspection, leaders failed to produce a timely action plan for improving residential conditions. New leadership figures, a head of residential governor and a clean and decent manager, did begin to focus attention on raising standards. Their initial efforts to change staff attitudes toward decency, including more visible leadership and wing-based meetings, were welcomed by staff. But the impact on the environment was limited. Inspectors described filthy cleaning cupboards, broken or dirty cleaning tools, and showers in disrepair with mildew, rotting wood, and fly infestations. Toilets in many cells remained stained and unpleasant. Although graffiti was being steadily covered by a prisoner painting group, overall the residential areas were still neglected. There was no self-catering opportunity, unusual for a Category C jail, and the emergency cell call bell response was poor, with calls left unanswered for over 10 minutes in one observation. Managers were capturing data on call bell response times, but did not seem to be analysing it. On this basis, inspectors judged that progress on improving living conditions was insufficient. Healthcare access, however, had improved dramatically. A senior leader had prioritised multi-agency collaboration with health providers, creating a joint process to track missed appointments and identify why patients refused to attend. As a result, only 0.4% of GP appointments were missed, a major success. External hospital appointments were also better managed, with fewer delays caused by a lack of prison escort staff. This joint strategy was seen as a notable positive practice that could be shared with other prisons, and progress in this area was rated good. Medicines management saw a similarly promising turnaround. Clinicians launched an innovative program to manage insomnia without drugs, promoting sleep hygiene techniques instead of relying on sedative medication. Remarkably, no prisoner was prescribed sleeping tablets by the time of the visit, and there were no complaints about the change. If prisoners did arrive at Brinsford already taking sedatives, they were swiftly offered safer first-line treatments and alternatives. Inspectors praised this evidence-based, non-medicinal strategy and noted the prison had let contracts to install secure medicines lockers to further strengthen safe dispensing. Progress here was judged good. In mental health care, transfers to outside hospitals were still delayed beyond the recommended 28-day window, but far less so than at the previous inspection. Staff and local NHS commissioners were meeting regularly to discuss patient cases, with commissioners receiving weekly updates on delays. Inspectors were satisfied that leaders were working hard to tackle a complex problem in a pressured system and rated mental health transfer arrangements as showing reasonable progress. Public protection, The crucial job of keeping potential high-risk prisoners from harming the public after release continued to present serious flaws. The review praised the work of a dedicated bail officer who checked the risk profiles of all new remand prisoners, sometimes discovering hidden concerns, and the expansion of the interdepartmental risk management meeting so that it could consider a wider range of prisoners. But significant weaknesses remained. Several prisoners approaching release who should have been reviewed at the risk management meeting were overlooked. In addition, liaison with the bail officer and pre-release team was poor, and information about public protection was not consistently shared with police or social services, especially for prisoners released directly from court. Inspectors highlighted that prisoners released early under end-of-custody supervised license sometimes arrived at Brinsford with no previous risk work done, which put further pressure on staff and left the public at risk. Progress was rated as insufficient. Education, training, and skills provision continued to fall well short of what inspectors expected. Ofsted found that too few prisoners were allocated to meaningful full-time activities, and too many roles, such as cleaners and painters, were poorly supervised and lacked training opportunities or targets to help prisoners improve. Although some new places had been added in waste management and mentoring, these only scratched the surface. English and mathematics education continued to suffer from poor attendance, with rates hovering at about 50%, and teachers failed to coordinate well enough to build on prisoners' personal learning plans. A reading strategy was in place in name only, with a quarter of identified low-level readers still waiting for proper assessment. Although some efforts were made to integrate reading material into work and lessons, and there were isolated examples of well-planned education in horticulture and barista courses, these were the exception. Prisoners still missed learning time because of regime clashes, with delays of up to 40 minutes at the start of lessons common, and no systematic tracking of why attendance was so poor. Personal targets, employability skills, and broader preparation for release were all weakly delivered. Teachers and instructors did not set meaningful goals to build the skills prisoners would need for employment or reintegration. Ofsted concluded that progress in all 4 education themes was insufficient. Overall, the review shows that Brinsford has managed to push forward in several areas where strong leadership, partnership working, and a cultural shift are beginning to take hold. Yet the prison remains beset by severe challenges, especially around purposeful activity, violence, public protection, and the poor condition of its living environment. The Chief Inspector concluded that while leadership changes had made a welcome impact on staff culture in early days of custody, the prison still had a long road to travel before it could be considered a safe, decent, and rehabilitative place. A prison catering instructor who fell pregnant after embarking on a sexual relationship with an inmate has been sentenced to 8 months in prison. Kirsty Howard, 24, began a secret affair with 20-year-old prisoner Liam Moretto while working at HMP Brinsford near Wolverhampton. During the illicit relationship, Howard not only breached strict professional boundaries by becoming sexually involved with Mr. Moretto, but also abused her position of trust by using the prison's internal systems to access confidential information about another inmate who was in conflict with Mr. Moretto. The relationship first came under suspicion after prison authorities at HMP Brinsford noticed concerning interactions between the pair. In order to confirm their suspicions, staff installed a covert CCTV camera to monitor Howard's movements. This evidence ultimately revealed the inappropriate relationship. Initially, Miss Howard of Sudbury Place in Newcastle-under-Lyme denied any sexual involvement with Mr. Moretto when confronted. However, according to the Crown Prosecution Service, CPS, she later admitted the affair, confessing that she had lied because she had panicked about the potential consequences of their relationship coming to light. Appearing at Shrewsbury Crown Court, Miss Howard pleaded guilty to misconduct in a public office for her actions between 1st February and 15th October 2018. Sentencing her, Judge Jonathan Gosling described her behaviour as shocking and a gross betrayal of the responsibilities entrusted to her as a prison employee. The governor described your behaviour, having a sexual relationship with a 20-year-old prisoner and conceiving a baby in prison, as shocking. That is an understatement, he told her. To force you apart from your young baby is a serious punishment in itself. The gravity of these offences vary enormously, but deterrence is important. Paul Reed, a spokesperson for the CPS, said the case highlighted the severe breach of trust involved. This is a serious offence, he said. By her actions, Hawat has done significant harm to public confidence in the prison system. The case has sparked wider concerns over staff-inmate boundaries and the effectiveness of safeguarding procedures inside UK prisons, with experts calling for stronger measures to prevent inappropriate relationships between staff and prisoners in the future. A prisoner who killed a fellow inmate with a single punch inside a young offenders institution has had his prison sentence extended. Abdi Rahman Isa, 21, was serving time at Brinsford Young Offenders Institution in Featherstone, Staffordshire, when he launched an unprovoked attack on 26-year-old John Smith. According to the Crown Prosecution Service, CPS, Mr. Isa struck Mr. Smith once to the side of the head without warning. The force of the blow caused Mr. Smith to fall, hitting his head against a door frame and then the ground. The impact fractured his jaw and left him with catastrophic brain injuries. Mr. Smith was rushed to hospital but tragically died the following day from his injuries. Mr. Isa had already admitted a charge of manslaughter in relation to the fatal attack. At Stafford Crown Court, he was ordered to serve an additional 27 months behind bars for the killing, along with a further 10 months on extended licence following his eventual release. The court heard that Mr. Smith's family had been left devastated by the loss. His mother, Yvonne Arbuckle, described how their lives had been shattered. The entire family are suffering because John is no longer with us, and we cannot come to terms with the fact that we shall never see him again, she said in a victim impact statement. John's siblings and I feel a part of us is now missing, that he has been taken from us in these circumstances. It is as if a light has gone out in our hearts. Detective Inspector Alan Lyford of Staffordshire Police called the incident a tragic and senseless case that highlighted the danger of violence behind bars. Prisons should be places of rehabilitation and safety, he said. This was a sudden, unprovoked attack which ended a young man's life and destroyed his family's future. Brinsford Young Offenders Institution, where the fatal assault took place, holds male inmates aged 18 to 21. The case has prompted renewed scrutiny of safety and violence levels within the prison system, with calls for improved protection measures for vulnerable inmates. HMP Brinsford, a young offenders institution in Staffordshire, has been labelled the most violent of its kind in the UK after a spate of horrifying incidents highlighted the extent of lawlessness, fear and neglect within its walls. In a shocking case that laid bare the chaos inside, 19-year-old Cameron Dunn, already on remand for murder, launched a brutal and unprovoked attack on a prison officer over a dispute about dirty laundry. Dunn punched the officer with such force that he collapsed, lying motionless on the floor. In a further act of viciousness, Mr. Dunn then stamped on the guard's head 5 times, leaving him needing 10 stitches before hurling a chair at a second member of staff. The terrifying assault was captured on CCTV and shared by Staffordshire Police, exposing the level of violence faced by staff in a facility meant to rehabilitate offenders, not traumatise workers or leave them seriously injured. Inspectors visiting the jail on an unannounced inspection described it as shabby and austere, revealing that many of its 450 prisoners, predominantly young men under 30, lived in poor conditions with missing curtains, broken chairs, and graffiti-scrawled walls. Inmates were reported to blast loud music, congregate unsupervised on the wings, and engage in frequent fights, often left unchecked by staff whose morale was said to be dangerously low. The scale of violence was staggering. Over the previous year, there were 217 prisoner-on-prisoner assaults, the highest of any comparable young offenders institution in the country. And inspectors also noted that there had been a homicide since the last inspection. assaults on staff were recorded at 31 incidents in a single year. Chief Inspector of Prisons Charlie Taylor described the findings as deeply worrying. Though violence had reduced slightly since our last inspection, the levels of prisoner-on-prisoner assaults were higher than at any comparator prison, which is extremely concerning. The inspection revealed that prisoners were often confined in their cells for 23 hours a day, given only half an hour of exercise and showers, while the regime left them whiling away their time sleeping or watching daytime television, rather than engaging in meaningful education or rehabilitation. Communal areas were described as tatty and uninspiring, while even parts of the prison that had recently been redecorated had already begun to deteriorate. In the segregation unit, cells were filthy and covered in graffiti. Inspectors also criticized the lack of proper supervision, observing how staff often congregated in offices away from the wings, leaving prisoners unmonitored and sometimes unaccounted for. Disruptive and antisocial behavior such as swearing, vaping in prohibited areas, and playing music at extreme volumes frequently went unchallenged, they said. The prison service has acknowledged the failings and promised to act. A spokesperson said steps were being taken to recruit more officers, extend prisoners' time outside cells, and improve living standards by reviewing cleaning schedules and refurbishing accommodation. Nationally, the government has pledged £315 million to address maintenance issues across the wider prison estate. Cameron Dunn, meanwhile, was sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years for murdering 17-year-old Delano Samuels in the Black Country. For the savage attack on the prison officer, he received a further 4 years and 3 months for wounding with intent and assaulting an emergency worker to run concurrently with his life sentence. The scandal surrounding HMP Brinsford raises grave questions about safety, resources, and leadership in youth custody, and whether a system meant to reform can ever succeed while it remains so chronically unsafe and neglected.